MatSu Valley is actually the largest real estate market in the entire state of Alaska. It has more inventory right now than any other market. So the question needs to be asked, hey, are we heading towards like a steep cliff anytime in the near future just with all the inventory coming on? Because as soon as you have more inventory than what you have is demand, the market just plummets at that point. So is that what we're going to be seeing in the MatSu Valley in the near future? Well, we're going to be taking a look at the market update. We'll be looking at the residential. We're actually going to be looking at the land today because that's something that's actually a lot more prevalent in the MatSu Valley than what you're going to find in most other areas. I'll explain why at the end here, and the multifamily. Before we get started though, make sure you give this video a like, subscribe, and help us get a little bit closer to our goal of hitting about 10,000 subscribers. We're getting really close. Could really use your help with that. So do make sure you go ahead and do that. Now let's go and jump into today's market update. Now, the first thing that we see if we are looking at the single family properties is that this time last year we had about 312 properties, and now we're at about 440 properties. So that is a significant increase. And actually, if we look historically, that's still lower than what we usually have this time of year. Usually we're going to be sitting right around 730 properties. But the fact that we're actually seeing those kind of numbers is actually kind of a nice indication for a change, especially if you're looking to purchase something, because it gives you more options. And the options that are in the MatSu Valley are usually going to be newer. They're going to be on larger lots. The downside is obviously going to be that you're going to have to drive to Anchorage usually because there's not as many employment opportunities over in the MatSu Valley. But that is a promising indication if you are looking for a home in the MatSu, which is usually Palmer or Wasilla. Now, the next thing that we're seeing is that the number of properties that have actually sold went from 158 this time last year to exactly 158 this year. That's right, exactly on the money, maintaining where we were the year before. And I'll honestly take that. The previous years when we were looking more to like the closer to the COVID times, it was a little bit higher. But still, we're pretty high historically for where we normally are, even with the much lower inventory for what we usually have, which does continue to indicate a high demand for properties that are in the MatSu Valley. And also the lion's share of when properties are actually going to be bought and sold is going to be closer to June, July, August. So, let's see what kind of data we have on those months moving forward. I suspect they're going to be pretty high based on what I've seen on the ground and everything. But, I could be wrong. We'll just see what the data says when it comes out. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is what's going on in the average sold price. So the average sold price hasn't done too much. Now, keep in mind, the past couple of years, we've seen double-digit appreciation year over year for the year to date. I think it was like 3 years in a row. And that is, you don't want to do that for too many years in a row because it starts creating a volatile situation. Prices, they just spike up all of a sudden, can spike down. So we're at a more conservative appreciation rate at this point, which is honestly right about where we want to be, because this time last year, average sold price was about $397,000. This year, it's about $403,000, which means we've increased by about 1.3%. Not a huge number, but it is continuing to increase. And keep in mind, really where we're going to see a big bump in the average sold price, and that's going to be a solid indicator for where we're at, is going to be when we start getting the data for the months of June, July, and August, because these are going to be the months that are really the meat of the bell curve of everything for the entire year. So, let's see what we see there. I suspect we're probably going to be right around like 4% increase for the average sold price year over year once it's all said and done. But, we'll just wait and see what happens. Obviously, if there's a sudden huge glut of inventory, prices are really going to go down. If there's a huge shortage of inventory all of a sudden, which it's kind of continuing to be like that. But if there's a huge demand in inventory with our low inventory right now, that might be a better way of putting it, then we're going to see an absolute explosion in prices. But, not seeing a huge surge in demand for homes right this minute. If interest rates suddenly drop, that could be a problem. But yeah, we'll talk more about this during the summary. But, that's what we're seeing right at the moment for the average sold price for single family homes. All right, now looking at the number of just raw land listings that we have over in the valley, we see there's actually been a slight increase for the land that's being sold right at the moment. This time last year, there was about 573 properties, and this year it's right about 616 properties that are available. So this it's kind of an indication that we are starting to see more land available. Now, once we kind of start looking back a little bit, we see usually around this time of year prior to COVID, we had about 1,000, about 1,100 pieces of raw land that were just out there ready to sell. And so yeah, we're seeing a slight increase from the year before, and that's great. Let's take the wins where we can get them. We're still nowhere near where we were prior to COVID. Now, what we're seeing as far as the number of raw land that's actually sold for the past year is we see that looking at this time last year, where we have the most complete information for the month of May, we see that there were 78 pieces of land that actually sold, and this year it's 65. So we're actually seeing a bit of a decrease, and I think really what this is an indication of is that we're probably just seeing that there's less cash in the market now than there was then, and less people who are looking at going and building a new home. And part of that can have something to do with kind of the uncertainty you get around every 4 years. I don't know if you know this or not. We have kind of an election, a number of elections that come up, and maybe the theory is people kind of want to keep their cash close to them as they're just trying to figure out what's going on the national scale. So that could be something that impacts land more so than we see with the financed properties. Because usually when you buy a raw land, it's going to be in cash. It's not really something that you finance, but that's what we're seeing right this minute. Let's see how we're doing as far as the average sold price. All right, let's take a look at what's going on in the average sold price. So in the average sold price, we see that this time last year it was $82,000. This year it's $81,000. Now, the average sold price when we're looking at land is kind of difficult to really extrapolate a whole lot of explanation behind it and a whole lot of good reasoning, just because this raw land does include everything from the little quarter acre property all the way up to 100 acres. And, we have actually seen some fluctuation over the years once it comes to the average sold price. So just because it's gone down, it's not a whole lot we can really take away from there, but it's just good to know that, back prior to COVID, it was about 60,000. Now it's 81,000 for the average. Let's go and take a break real quick here. For those of you who've been watching for a little bit, you do know that I host a meetup for people who have recently moved up here. And if that describes you and you'd like to kind of connect and have the ability to actually go meet people who have recently moved up here, do feel free to go join our Facebook group. Link for that is going to be in the description section down below. And we just go and we do something usually pretty simple once a month, just an opportunity to go hiking or something like that and kind of get to know people. So if you're looking for an opportunity to kind of plug in and meet your people, this is going to be a good place to go do it. Now, let's go and finish up today's market update, looking at the multifamily market and then the summary. Now, looking at the multifamily market, we're seeing this time last year, there were 37 properties that were on the market, and this year there are 32. All right, now looking at the number of multifamily properties that have actually sold, this time last year there were 8, and this year there are 3. And kind of by and large, for the most part, we're seeing a bit of a decline for the number of multifamily properties that are actually selling in the valley. I think this probably has something to do with the average sold price for these properties. I think a lot of the property owners that are actually selling at this point, they're getting a little greedy, kind of from what I've heard from people who are working on the ground and actually looking at purchasing these properties. And that really is a shame because a lot of people do really like the multifamily properties in the MatSu Valley. But, if they're not being realistic with their price, then investors aren't going to waste time with it and they're just going to find something elsewhere. But let's go and take a look at the average sold price and see what that looks like. Now, looking at the average sold price, we see that the year-to-date price for this time last year was right around $579,000. This year, it's $588,000, which we're seeing about a 1.5% point. But here's the thing. Back in the previous year for 2022, year-to-date, average sold price was right around $493,000. So you're seeing about $100,000 increase for the average sold price. And that's a little extreme. And obviously that includes everything from the little duplex all the way up to a commercial property. But we can all agree that is still an enormous increase for the average sold price. And that kind of explains why we might start seeing kind of a cooling down for properties in the MatSu Valley, just because investors, it's all numbers. And if it doesn't make sense, then they're not going to pursue them. So just something that we're going to keep an eye on kind of moving forward. But just to give you a summary real quick, really what I'm seeing is if you are a buyer in this market, that's more favorable than you're going to find in any other market in the entire state. You're going to have more land, more space wherever you're at. The properties are going to be newer and they're going to be more affordable than you're going to be able to find in most other parts of the state. The downside being, obviously, you're usually going to have to commute to Anchorage because there's not as many employment opportunities in the valley as you're going to find in Anchorage. Now, if you're a seller, this isn't the same market that we had a couple of years ago where you could just ask for anything and you were going to get it. Like it's a bit different from what we had a couple of years ago, but this is still a really solid market to be in if you are a seller, because this means that you are going to be able to get a pretty good price for your property as long as you are realistic on the price that you start with. And you are also somebody that is going to take the staging, the photos, and all that seriously, because this isn't like what we had a couple of years ago where you could just put any old thing out there and it was going to sell. I heard over the weekend, I think it's like 72 properties over the weekend end up having to do price cuts just this past weekend, which means that a lot of sellers are having to learn the lesson about overpricing their properties, and just don't let that be you. Investors, not much I can say here. Just make sure that your numbers actually do shake out when you're running everything. And feel free to reach out to me if you do have any questions. If you are in any one of these categories, buyer, seller, investor, I'd be more than happy to help. But this has been your market update looking at the MatSu Valley. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.